The game of money is dead. The game of speed has just started, and you are playing the wrong one. Because the rules have changed. Not the rules of AI, not the rules of tech. The rules of wealth itself, who gets it, who keeps it, and who gets left holding a highway that leads to nowhere. For 70 years, the people who ran global development handed you the same weapon over and over: money. Move the capital, pour the concrete, write the report. Wait. That weapon is obsolete, and almost nobody running a country, a company, or a career has been told. In the AI era, the game has completely changed. Nations that actually win aren't the ones with the deepest pockets. They are the ones that treat intelligence as foundational infrastructure. They can sense reality without political filters, learn from mistakes in real time, and adapt faster than the world changes. Development in the AI era is now synonymous with the theory of intelligence-led development. It is not a buzzword. It's the operating system for the 21st century. This is Conscious Pirate. Today I'm going to show you the map that replaces the old game. The exact grid every nation, every institution, and honestly every ambitious person is being sorted onto right now, whether they know it or not. And by the end of this video, you'll know the 5 schools of thought about to rewrite the economics textbooks, the 4 weapons the winners are already holding, and which quadrant you, your company, or your country is standing in today. Let's go. So here's the promise. In the next 20 minutes, you'll see the map of the 21st century, a single grid that predicts a nation's 2050 wealth better than its current GDP does today. You'll see the trap that's currently bankrupting governments and companies that think they're innovating with AI, while actually going backwards. You'll get the 4 weapons, the 4 C's, that separate the winners from the wreckage. And you'll meet the 5 new schools of economic thought, quietly replacing everything you were taught in a textbook written for a world that no longer exists. This isn't theory for economists in a conference room. This is the boundary line between the projects that attract global capital in the next decade and the ones that are dead before they start. So, what are we saying here? The rules of development just changed. The old weapons, capital, concrete, compliance, don't work anymore. What you're about to see is the new rulebook and the 5 weapons the winners are already using. Let's start with the weapon everyone was handed. For most of the last 70 years, the global development establishment sold the world a simple story. Development is a scarcity problem. Scarcity of capital, scarcity of skills, scarcity of effort. The prescription followed like clockwork: move billions in aid, build massive concrete infrastructure, write beautifully formatted reform papers, wait for growth to magically show up. Here's the part nobody wants to say out loud: it didn't work. After trillions of dollars in aid, concessional finance, and structural adjustment programs, productivity in dozens of nations completely failed to compound. Not slowed, failed to compound. And that tells us something the top 1% of institutional builders are only now whispering. The problem was never a lack of resources. The binding constraint on human progress has moved. And if you're an investor, an entrepreneur, or a leader trying to navigate the next decade, this single fact is the new dividing line between the projects that pull in global capital and the ones that are structurally dead on arrival. That's rule number 1 of the new rulebook. Money is no longer the weapon. Capital is dead. I repeat, capital is dead. Here is why. This is the map, not a chart from a textbook, the literal blueprint of global power through 2050. Where a country, a company, or honestly a career sits on this grid says more about its future than its current balance sheet ever will. Horizontal axis, the true source of productivity. For most of history, that was physical: capital, land, brute labor. Today, it's shifting to institutional intelligence, a system's ability to coordinate, learn from its own errors, and adapt at scale. Not IQ, not talent, learning speed, vertical axis, governance logic. Down here, static rules, manual enforcement, 5-year plans carved in stone. Up here, adaptive systems, real-time feedback, decisions that update themselves. This vertical axis is the new rulebook for economic prosperity. Every country on Earth right now is drifting toward one of four corners. And once you see these four, you will not be able to unsee them. In governments, in companies, even in your own industry. This is where the new rules get written. Let's walk the traps first. Bottom left, the old world. This is the exact model dozens of post-colonial nations inherited. Aid-led growth, infrastructure before institutions, a culture of compliance over performance. The logic was completely linear. Spend more, build more, grow more. History says that logic is dead wrong. Foreign capital flowed in faster than local institutions could physically absorb it. Money leaked. Infrastructure without learning simply decayed. Rules without feedback hardened into pure bureaucratic rigidity. This model worked when wealth came exclusively from low-value factories and physical scale. It completely breaks the moment growth depends on high-velocity coordination. A nation stuck here isn't just slow, it's structurally blind to reality. That's the first trap. Here's the second one, and it's the one fooling the most people right now. So what did the modern technocrats do to fix the old model? They looked at the tech boom and tried to shortcut the system. Digitize, launch flashy AI pilots, import enterprise platforms from Silicon Valley, buy expensive, shiny executive dashboards. I call this AI theater. It is the single fastest way for a modern nation or a modern company to go bankrupt while performing innovation. Here's the hard truth. Smart tools embedded inside dumb systems do not create development. They create dependency with a better user interface. Efficiency ticks up at the margin, but the system itself doesn't learn. And because the core models, the data, and the operational logic are all externalized, sovereignty erodes silently in the background, while everyone's celebrating the dashboard. You're not an independent state or a sovereign business anymore. You're a digital sharecropper, renting space on a server you don't own and can't audit. That's the trap the new weapon sets for anyone who picks it up without fixing the system underneath it first. Some countries look at that chaos and swing the opposite way. When productivity stalls and corruption leaks, the gut reaction is regulate harder. More rules, more anti-corruption task forces, more layers of veto power. But the data shows a devastating pattern. Regulation without real-time intelligence produces nothing but order without adaptation. The entire apparatus turns risk-averse. Decisions that should take 48 hours take 9 months because doing nothing has become safer than doing something new. This quadrant produces beautiful stability, on paper, and absolute economic stagnation in reality. 3 traps down. Now, the one corner on this entire map where the new rules actually pay off. There is exactly one quadrant where AI delivers compounding economic growth. The intelligence-led adaptive state. The nations heading here don't treat AI like a portfolio of cool apps or a PR stunt. They treat intelligence exactly like physical infrastructure, the same category as roads, electricity grids, deep water ports. A foundational capacity, not a feature. Their institutions can sense economic reality as it happens. They detect a supply chain bottleneck on Monday. They adjust tariff policy on Tuesday. They catch policy failures early and correct course instantly. In these systems, wealth compounds, because learning compounds. Global capital rushes toward these nations because their operating systems are predictable, resilient, and transparent. That's the destination. This is the identity and definition of economic prosperity in the AI era. Now, here's the part almost nobody survives: getting there. This diagonal line is the single most dangerous feature of the entire map. The transition path is narrow and it is brutally unforgiving. Hear this clearly. You cannot digitize your way out of institutional weakness, and you cannot regulate your way into intelligence. If you scale technology before you fix the institutional architecture underneath it, the machine doesn't fix your failures, it amplifies them. at a speed you cannot control. So if institutional intelligence is the new currency of power, here are the 4 weapons you actually need to earn it. The 4 C's. Connectivity. Why does a 140 megabits per second connection generate exponentially more wealth than a 25 megabits per second line? Because at 25 megabits per second, you're a passive consumer watching the future happen to someone else. At 140 megabits per second, you're a creator executing high-frequency value. Compute, the literal metabolism of the digital age. If you don't own the engine room, you don't own your choices. Context. Stop importing foreign algorithms to solve indigenous problems. If a model doesn't understand your local soil, your land tenure, your community's own laws, it isn't a tool, it's a liability wearing a tool's clothing. Competency. Civil servants and leaders who actually understand systemic architecture, not people treating transformation like an isolated IT ticket to be outsourced and forgotten. 4 weapons, 1 narrow bridge. Everything else is noise dressed up as strategy. Here's what I promised you at the start. By mid-century, the old economic textbooks are obsolete. In their place, 5 distinct schools of thought are already emerging. 5 new weapons of ideas, replacing everything you were taught about how nations get rich. Intelligence-led development, where a country's primary macroeconomic metric becomes its learning velocity, how fast it turns data into error correction. Systems productivity, treating the speed and quality of governance itself as a hard macroeconomic variable, not an administrative afterthought. Cognitive sovereignty, the hard requirement that a nation controls its own data loops and foundation models to preserve real geopolitical autonomy. Dignity-based development, recognizing that systemic trust and institutional fairness aren't soft, emotional concepts. They are high-yield productive assets. Adaptive state theory, where public policy stops being written in stone and becomes an iterative hypothesis, tested continuously against real-time feedback. 5 schools. 1 shared idea underneath all of them. The winners of this century won't be the richest. They'll be the ones who learn the fastest. But let's bring this down to earth, because this was never just an abstract debate for economists. When an institution can't learn, the cost never lands on the leadership. It lands on the farmer waiting weeks in the heat for a permit, the nurse improvising with broken equipment because the supply database is blind, the small business owner paying a bribe to bypass a system that simply doesn't work, the child who grows up invisible to a state with no capacity to see them. Institutional intelligence, built properly, is the opposite of surveillance. It's dignity, at scale. The next great development failure won't come from a lack of resources. It won't come from corruption alone. It will come from the arrogance of applying yesterday's static rules with tomorrow's exponential weapons. New rules, new weapons. The nations and the people who master both are the ones who win the next 50 years. Everyone else is just decorating their decay. So, here's the only question that matters. Are you building tools to decorate the decay? Or are you brave enough to build something that actually learns? This is Conscious Pirate. Think deeper. Build stronger. Your life is your adventure. Never surrender your future. Ahoy.